Night settled over the abandoned gym like a silent verdict, casting long shadows across the concrete floor where Ethan Hale pushed himself beyond exhaustion. He trained alone, breath ragged, muscles trembling, as if the dim lights overhead interrogated every weakness he carried. For months he had shaped his life around discipline, ritual, and a relentless need to prove something unnamed. Tonight, the air felt heavier, as though the world watched him, waiting for the truth he refused to face. Ethan had never worn a uniform, never sworn an oath, yet he lived as though bound by invisible military code. Each dawn he rose before the sun, chasing a vision carved from childhood fantasies and adult inadequacies. His father had once served, though the man spoke of it only in fragments, quiet stories, half-faded photographs, and a silence that grew heavier with the years. Ethan mistook that silence for expectation, believing discipline might bridge the distance between who he was and who he feared he should be. Tonight marked the 43rd consecutive night he had pushed himself to the brink, rehearsing drills he stitched together from documentaries, manuals, and fragments of military folklore. He ducked, rolled, sprinted, and steadied imaginary rifles with precision born not of training but obsession. Sweat pooled at his feet like a confession. He told no one about these midnight rituals. In this quiet gym, he believed he could craft a version of himself strong enough to silence doubts he carried like hidden wounds. But beneath every controlled breath lingered a memory he tried to outrun. It was the moment 3 months earlier when he had frozen during a street altercation, paralyzed while another man was injured before his eyes. The shame of that hesitation dug its claws into him, whispering that courage was something other men possessed. Since that night, he had dedicated himself to erasing fear through sheer force of will. What he didn't understand was that fear rarely yields to rituals without truth. Still, Ethan pressed forward, counting each rep like a penance. The gym echoed with the rhythm of his determination, the thud of his boots on rubber mats, the sharp exhale that cut through the silence. Outside, rain tapped against the windows in steady cadence, as if nature itself kept time with him. He imagined storms soldiers endured, battles fought in mud and darkness, and believed suffering made him closer to the hero he longed to be. Yet longing carried its own weight, heavier than any barbell. A distant hinge squeaked, but Ethan dismissed it as the settling groan of old metal. He was used to the building's murmurs, the nocturnal creaks that stitched themselves into his routine. He wiped sweat from his brow and shifted into another drill, boots scraping against the floor with military sharpness. His lungs burned, but he welcomed the pain. Pain, he believed, was currency, proof he was paying his dues to some unseen standard. He did not yet know another pair of eyes watched him. The figure stood just inside the entrance, obscured by shadow but unmistakably present. Ethan felt a shift in the air, an instinctive prickle along his spine, though he kept moving. His mind spun stories, maybe a janitor, maybe someone looking for shelter, but none aligned with the posture of the silhouette. It was rigid, deliberate, patient. As Ethan transitioned into a final set of drills, the figure stepped forward, boots landing with precision that mirrored the discipline Ethan only imitated. Something in the room changed. Ethan slowed, breath heavy, sensing the scrutiny but unwilling to acknowledge it. To stop felt like admitting he didn't belong in the world he tried so desperately to emulate. He straightened his stance, squared his shoulders, and prepared to launch into another sequence, determined to look competent under the unseen gaze. Yet the silence behind him thickened, alive with expectation. He didn't notice his hands trembling, or the subtle tremor in his voice when he finally asked the room if someone was there. The answer came not as a voice but as footsteps, measured, authoritative, unmistakably trained. Each step carried the cadence of someone who had walked through deserts, jungles, and battlefields far from this quiet gym. Ethan turned slowly, dread and curiosity warring in his chest. For a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the outline of the stranger approaching. Then the dim lights revealed the figure fully, a man in uniform, posture carved from discipline, eyes sharp with experience. A real commander had walked in. Ethan's pulse hammered as the man halted several feet away, studying him with an expression that was neither judgment nor amusement, but something far more disarming, recognition. The commander took in the scattered weights, the amateur formations chalked on the floor, the exhaustion etched into Ethan's posture. Seconds stretched thin. Ethan felt suddenly exposed, as though every pretended act of discipline had been a whispered secret the man could now read. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound emerged, only the echo of his own uncertainty. The commander's gaze softened, though his voice, when it finally came, carried years of command layered beneath quiet restraint. He asked Ethan what he was training for, but the question felt larger than its phrasing. Ethan sensed it probed deeper, not into his technique, but into the hollow spaces he tried to fill. He swallowed, unsure whether to answer honestly or maintain the facade. The air felt brittle with truth, hovering just beyond reach. Somewhere outside, thunder groaned, mirroring the tension coiling within him. Ethan managed a single breath before answering, though his words emerged fractured. He said he wanted to be strong enough, to protect, to act, to never freeze again. The commander listened, unmoving, absorbing every syllable with the patience of someone who understood the cost of such vows. When Ethan finished, silence fell once more, heavier than before, pressing against the walls of the gym. The commander stepped closer, his expression unreadable, and Ethan felt the moment tightening into a hinge upon which his entire future might turn. The commander's presence settled into the room like a shifting gravity, altering the air around Ethan until even his breath felt monitored. He stood there, sweat-soaked and exposed, as the man's silence tightened around him. Outside, the storm continued its slow percussion, punctuating each second with distant thunder that seemed determined to underline the weight of the moment. Ethan had imagined a soldier walking into his life countless times, but never like this, never with eyes that seemed to understand fractures he had never spoken aloud. The commander stepped farther into the gym, his boots making no unnecessary sound. Ethan noticed the details now, the precise crease in the uniform, the faint lines on the man's face carved by years of command, the posture of someone who had lived inside danger long enough to measure every threat instinctively. Yet there was no hostility in his stance, only a quiet authority that made Ethan's attempts at imitation feel suddenly small. "What's your name?" the commander asked. "Ethan. Ethan Hale." His voice cracked at the edges, betraying nerves he tried to suppress. The commander nodded slowly, as though committing the name to memory for reasons Ethan could not decipher. "I'm Commander Rourke." The name struck Ethan like a chord, familiar, though he couldn't place why. Rourke held his gaze a moment longer, reading him with disarming precision before shifting his attention to the chalk-lined drills scrawled across the floor. He stepped closer, examining the diagrams Ethan had pieced together from videos and manuals. To Ethan, they had represented discipline. To a real soldier, they must have looked like fragments of something he did not yet understand. "You made these?" Rourke asked. Ethan nodded. "They're earnest," Rourke said, choosing the word with care. He didn't mock, but the truth embedded in the tone stung. Ethan felt his chest tighten as Rourke crouched to study one of the formations. The storm outside rumbled in agreement, as though echoing his rising self-doubt. Rourke straightened and faced him again. "Tell me why you're training like this. And tell me the real reason." Ethan's throat closed for a moment. He wanted to answer, to defend himself, but the truth pressed against his ribs like a trapped wind. He exhaled slowly, feeling the words scrape their way out. 3 months ago, something happened. I froze. Someone got hurt because I couldn't do anything. I don't ever want to be like that again." Rourke studied him, not the way a superior evaluated a subordinate, but the way a man weighed another man's wounds. "Freezing doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're human." Ethan looked away, jaw tight. "Maybe. But it still cost someone." Rourke stepped closer, close enough that Ethan could smell the rain dampening his uniform, the faint scent of metal and earth etched into the fibers. "You think training alone in a dark gym will change what happened?" "I think it's all I can do," Ethan said, though the words didn't feel as certain as they had yesterday or the day before. Rourke crossed his arms, expression unreadable. "Discipline isn't born from repetition alone. It's born from understanding what drives you and what breaks you." His eyes held Ethan in place. "You're not preparing for battle. You're preparing for a moment you can't rewrite." The comment cut deeper than Ethan expected. His hands curled into fists, trembling not from exertion but vulnerability he wanted to shield. Rourke noticed. He noticed everything. "Show me," Rourke said. Ethan blinked. "Show you what?" "How you train. How you move. How you think you're preparing." Ethan hesitated. The idea of performing his self-taught drills in front of someone who had lived the reality he only mimicked felt humiliating. Yet there was no mockery in Rourke's stance, only expectation, firm and steady. Ethan swallowed hard and nodded. He stepped to the center of the gym, feeling the floor tilt beneath the weight of scrutiny. He began the routine, the sprint, the drop, the roll, the stance. He counted breaths the way he always did, matching them to the rhythmic echo of his boots. But under Rourke's gaze, everything felt different. His movements were sharp but unrefined. His transitions lacked efficiency. His balance wavered in ways he had never noticed. Rourke circled him slowly, observing with the quiet intensity of a man who had evaluated countless soldiers. Ethan pushed harder, desperate to show the discipline he had forced into his bones. But the harder he pushed, the more the imperfections showed. A misstep. A delayed pivot. A posture too rigid. He felt himself unravel under the weight of truth. When he finally stopped, chest heaving, sweat dripping freely, he couldn't bring himself to look at Rourke. The storm outside seemed to quiet, as though waiting for the verdict. Rourke let the silence stretch before speaking. "You have heart," he said. "More than some recruits I've trained." Ethan's eyes lifted, surprise cutting through his exhaustion. "But heart without direction is just exhaustion," Rourke continued, voice firmer. "You're trying to punish yourself into becoming someone else. That's not training. That's desperation wearing the mask of discipline." Ethan felt the words land like strikes, not cruel, but undeniably accurate. He sank onto a nearby bench, elbows on his knees, breath still uneven. Rourke walked to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "You said you froze," Rourke murmured, his reflection faint in the glass. "Do you know why?" Ethan shook his head slowly. "It wasn't fear," Rourke said. "It was shock. People freeze when something tears through the script they expect the world to follow." Ethan swallowed. "Are you saying it wasn't my fault?" Rourke turned, leaning back against the window. "I'm saying you're blaming yourself for being unprepared for chaos. No amount of hallway drills or improvised formations would have changed that moment." The words loosened something inside Ethan, a knot he had carried so long he hadn't realized how tightly it cinched his chest. Rourke stepped toward him. "But you can learn. Not by pretending to be a soldier, but by understanding why that moment haunts you." Ethan held his gaze, the weight of months settling into clarity he hadn't expected. "Then what do I do?" Rourke paused, measuring him again, not the man Ethan pretended to be, but the one beneath. "First," he said, "you stop training alone in the dark." Ethan exhaled, a breath that felt like the beginning of something he couldn't yet name. "And second?" he asked. Rourke's expression shifted, part challenge, part invitation. "You let someone teach you the truth." The gym felt different the next morning, brighter, though the lights were the same, quieter, though no storm pressed against its windows. Ethan arrived early, long before dawn, half expecting the emptiness to return, half fearing that Rourke's presence had been a dream conjured from exhaustion. But when the door creaked open behind him and steady boot steps crossed the threshold, the truth settled across his shoulders like a weight he wasn't sure he was ready to carry. Rourke entered without ceremony, carrying a duffel slung over one shoulder. He didn't nod, didn't greet, didn't pause. He simply walked past Ethan and set the bag on the floor with a soft thud that echoed louder than any command. Ethan straightened instinctively, unsure whether this was respect or intimidation, or something between the two. "Warm up," Rourke said, already unzipping the duffel. Ethan hesitated only a second before beginning the stretches, the movements suddenly foreign under the watch of someone who understood the language of discipline better than Ethan ever had. Rourke laid out equipment, cones, resistance bands, a weighted vest, objects Ethan had never used but had seen in videos of military conditioning. There was no judgment in Rourke's expression, only purpose. Ethan felt both exposed and invited into a world he had pretended to know. When Ethan finished warming up, Rourke gestured him over. "We start with movement, not punishment," Rourke said. "Your body doesn't know what you're asking of it yet." Ethan nodded, though embarrassment prickled along his skin. He had spent months pushing himself to collapse, believing pain alone would sculpt resilience. Rourke's approach felt like stepping into light after living in shadows. The first drill was simple in theory. Weave through cones, shift direction, maintain balance. In execution, Ethan stumbled. His turns were too wide, his footwork too heavy. Rourke watched silently at first, then stepped forward and adjusted Ethan's shoulders, guiding with a firm but steady hand. "You move like you're bracing for impact," Rourke said. "You don't trust the ground yet." Ethan blinked. "What does that mean?" "It means you're training to survive, not to respond." Rourke motioned again. "Go." Ethan repeated the drill. This time he listened not to his instincts but to the rhythm Rourke's observations created. He loosened his posture, shifted his weight, allowed his feet to adapt. It wasn't graceful, but something inside him clicked, a recognition that imitation had never given him. When he finished, chest rising in controlled breaths, Rourke nodded once. Approval, small but deliberate. Again. And again he went, until sweat dripped into his eyes and the gym floor grew slick beneath his steps. Rourke corrected him sparingly, a hand on his back to guide posture, a tap on the elbow to adjust angle, a single word spoken at the exact moment Ethan needed it. It wasn't coddling. It was precision. By the time they moved to stability drills, Ethan's muscles burned with a new kind of ache, one that felt earned, not extracted. Rourke handed him the weighted vest. Ethan slid it on, surprise flickering across his features at how natural it felt to take instruction rather than invent it. Rourke noticed. "You've been carrying weight without structure," Rourke said. "This at least distributes evenly." Ethan didn't know whether he meant the vest or something deeper. The next drill forced Ethan to confront balance, patience, and control, the very elements he had neglected in his self-taught regimen. Rourke stood beside him, offering adjustments that were neither soft nor harsh, but exact. Ethan found himself wanting to meet the standard, not from pride, but from a sudden, unfamiliar desire for alignment. Halfway through the session, Rourke called for a break. Ethan collapsed onto the floor, forearms resting on his knees, breath heavy but steady. Rourke didn't sit. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, studying Ethan with an expression Ethan still couldn't decipher. "You learn fast," Rourke said. Ethan looked up, startled. "You think so?" "I know so. People who train alone don't usually adapt. They cling to habits because those habits kept them from quitting." Rourke's gaze sharpened. "But you're not clinging. You're listening." The words hit Ethan with unexpected force. Praise had never been a language spoken in his household. His father's silence had felt like an unspoken standard, one Ethan never met. For a moment, that old wound pulsed beneath the surface. Rourke noticed the shift in Ethan's expression. His tone softened, barely. "Who taught you discipline?" Ethan hesitated. "My dad." "Sort of. He served, but he never talked about it. I guess I filled in the gaps myself." Rourke nodded slowly, understanding settling across his gaze. "Silence leaves its own instructions." Ethan swallowed. "He always seemed disappointed in me. Or maybe I just thought he was. I don't know." "Men carry expectations they never speak," Rourke said. "But that doesn't make them yours to fulfill." Ethan looked down, running a hand across the floor's cool surface. "I thought if I pushed hard enough, long enough, maybe I'd become someone he respected." Rourke didn't immediately respond. He walked to the duffel, pulled out 2 canteens, and tossed one to Ethan. "Respect isn't earned through mimicry. It's earned through understanding who you are and why you act." Ethan opened the canteen, water grounding him. "Then why do you think I'm doing this?" Rourke considered him, eyes narrowing, not in judgment, but in analysis. "Because you're trying to prove you can be brave. But bravery isn't built from punishment. It's built from clarity." The gym felt smaller suddenly, the air tighter, the truth unavoidable. Ethan's heartbeat echoed in his ears, steady but uncertain. Rourke stepped closer. "That night you froze. You keep replaying it because you think courage is the absence of hesitation." His voice lowered. "But courage is what you do after hesitation." Ethan's throat tightened. "What do you mean?" "You showed up here," Rourke said. "Night after night. Trying to become someone stronger. That's courage. Misguided, maybe, but courage all the same." The word struck something deep and trembling within Ethan. For months he had believed he was running from weakness. It had never occurred to him that he had been running towards something instead. Rourke checked his watch. "Break's over." Ethan stood, legs shaking but resolve firmer than when the morning began. Rourke placed new cones on the floor, creating a pattern more complex than the first. "This one isn't about speed," he said. "It's about trust." "Trust in what?" Ethan asked. "Yourself," Rourke answered simply, "and your ability to move through uncertainty without flinching." The drill began, and Ethan entered it with a focus he had never known. His body was exhausted, but his mind felt sharpened. He stumbled, corrected, faltered, recovered. Every misstep became a lesson, not a failure. Rourke watched closely, offering only the instructions Ethan needed at the exact moment he needed them. As the session neared its end, Rourke spoke again, almost quietly. "There's something else you need to understand, Ethan. Something men your age often overlook." Ethan paused, chest rising and falling. "What's that?" Rourke met his gaze with a calm, unwavering steadiness. "Strength isn't built in isolation. It's built in the presence of someone who sees you clearly, especially when you don't see yourself." Ethan felt those words settle into him, anchoring deeper than any drill, any lesson, any punishment he'd endured alone in the dark. He nodded once, not in obedience, but in understanding. For the first time since the night that had shaken him, Ethan felt something shift, something small but irrevocable. Not the end of fear, but the beginning of truth. Dawn came muted and gray, stretching thin light across the city like a quiet reckoning. Ethan felt it before he saw it, the weight of the day, the unspoken shift in his training, the sense that something waited just beyond the horizon of his understanding. Rourke had told him clarity was the root of courage. But clarity, Ethan was learning, often arrived like a slow-forming bruise, subtle at first, then unavoidable. By the time he reached the gym, Rourke was already there. The commander wasn't setting cones or unpacking the duffel. He stood in the center of the room with his hands behind his back, posture sharpened by a stillness Ethan hadn't yet seen. The air felt heavier, as though the walls themselves understood the gravity of whatever came next. "You're late," Rourke said, though Ethan was 5 minutes early. Ethan stiffened. "Sorry, Rourke shook his head. "No excuses. Not today." The words weren't harsh. They were a threshold. Ethan stepped inside, letting the door fall shut behind him. The gym felt colder this morning. Or maybe it was just the knowledge that whatever training they had done so far had been leading to this moment, a moment neither had named. "Vest on," Rourke said. Ethan obeyed, securing the weighted straps across his torso. Rourke watched with an expression unreadable but intent. When Ethan finished, Rourke circled him once, as though evaluating something deeper than posture. "What's happening today?" Ethan asked. Rourke stopped in front of him. "Today we stop rehearsing. Today we confront what actually happened." Ethan's chest tightened. He hadn't expected this, not now, not with the echoes of his progress still fresh. But Rourke's eyes held no room for retreat. "Tell me what you remember," Rourke said. Ethan swallowed. "I told you." I froze. "That's not a memory. That's a judgment," Rourke replied. "Tell me what you saw." The room felt too quiet. Ethan rubbed his palms against his vest unconsciously. There was shouting. A man shoved another into the street. I stepped forward, but... "You hesitated," Rourke finished. "Why?" "I don't know," Ethan snapped, frustration flaring. "Maybe I wasn't ready. Maybe I didn't know what to do." Rourke stepped closer, voice low. "And today you will." Before Ethan could respond, Rourke pulled a small metal object from his pocket, a remote. With a click, speakers mounted high on the walls crackled to life. Suddenly the gym filled with sound, shouting, footsteps, chaos. Ethan's entire body tensed as the echoes of that night resurfaced, not identical, but close enough to rattle something unfinished inside him. "This is wrong," Ethan muttered. "It's not the same." "It's not meant to be the same," Rourke said. "It's meant to confront the gap you're trying to outrun." Ethan closed his eyes, fighting the instinct to recoil. The sounds pressed into him, old fear rising like smoke. Rourke's voice cut through it. "Move." Ethan opened his eyes. Rourke had positioned obstacles across the floor, barriers, angles, lines that forced quick thinking instead of memorized choreography. It was a reconstruction, Not of the event itself, but of the uncertainty that had crushed him that night. Ethan took a step. Then another. Rourke watched him, voice steady but unyielding. "You're not here to imitate soldiers. You're here to reclaim a moment." Ethan moved through the course, each shift of his weight a battle against the echoes slamming against him. The shouting in the speakers grew louder, overlapping, disorienting. His breath faltered. His hands trembled. Rourke appeared beside him, moving with silent precision. "Focus. What do you control?" Ethan forced a breath. "My stance." "Good. What else?" "My movement." "And your fear?" Rourke asked. Ethan hesitated. "I don't control that." Rourke stepped in front of him. "Exactly. You don't control fear. You navigate it." The speakers erupted in a yell that mirrored the one Ethan had heard the night of the incident. His heart lurched. His body froze in place. Rourke's voice cracked through the paralysis. "Eyes on me." Ethan dragged his gaze upward. "You think freezing makes you weak," Rourke said. "But freezing is the mind demanding information it doesn't have. Strength is in what you choose after. Move again." Ethan swallowed hard and forced his legs forward. His movements were stiff at first, but they warmed into purpose. He slipped between obstacles, pivoted, corrected, adapted. The shouting didn't fade, but something inside him shifted, something that no longer recoiled, but steadied. Rourke's expression changed slightly, a signal Ethan had never seen before. Approval, but also something deeper, recognition of a turning point. Halfway through the course, Ethan stumbled. Not from panic, but from pushing too hard. He caught himself on a barrier, breath sharp. Rourke stood beside him in seconds. "Why did you fall?" Ethan panted. "Because I wasn't paying attention." "No," Rourke said. "You fell because you reached a threshold. And thresholds are where courage begins." Ethan felt the words settle, anchor, resonate. He rose again. This time he moved differently, not perfectly, not fluidly, but fully present. His steps were grounded. His decisions deliberate. The noise around him no longer dictated his rhythm, it existed alongside it. Rourke watched, arms crossed, eyes sharp with something like pride. When Ethan reached the end of the course, he stopped, chest heaving, sweat pouring, but gaze steadier than it had been in months. Rourke clicked the remote. The room fell silent instantly. Ethan expected relief. Instead, he felt something else, release. Rourke walked toward him. "Tell me what you felt." Ethan wiped sweat from his temples. "Fear. Confusion. Doubt. But—" he took a shaking breath. "But I kept going." "That," Rourke said, "is the foundation you've been missing. Not strength. Not imitation. Continuation." Ethan nodded slowly. His pulse no longer raced with panic, only exertion. But Rourke wasn't finished. "I need to tell you something," he said. Ethan looked up, sensing the shift in tone. Rourke's posture had changed, still rigid, but shadowed with something personal. "You asked why my name sounded familiar," Rourke said. Ethan's breath caught. He had forgotten he'd ever mentioned it. Rourke continued, voice quieter than Ethan had ever heard it. "I knew your father." The world seemed to shrink. Ethan felt the floor tilt beneath him. "What?" Rourke exhaled, gaze distant. "He didn't just serve. He saved lives. Mine included." Ethan stared, heartbeat stumbling. "But he never talked about it," Ethan whispered. "Men who carry heavy truths rarely do," Rourke said. "He protected people. And he carried burdens he didn't want to pass to you." The revelation cracked through Ethan like lightning. Everything, his father's silences, his own self-imposed training, the invisible expectations he had built his life around, shifted under the weight of truth. "Why didn't he tell me?" Ethan asked, voice raw. Rourke met his eyes. "Because he didn't want you to feel obligated to become him." A silence hung between them, thick with understanding and wounds being rewritten. Ethan swallowed. "Then why are you telling me?" Rourke stepped closer, speaking with a precision that cut through every remaining doubt. "Because you deserve to know the truth, not the ghosts you invented to punish yourself with." Ethan's throat tightened. The gym felt suddenly too bright, too open. Rourke said nothing more. He didn't need to. Ethan understood. This was not the end of his training. It was the beginning of his transformation. Evening settled over the city like a quiet epilogue, soft and amber, as if the world itself sensed the closing of something long unresolved. Ethan walked toward the gym with steps that felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, but more rooted, as though each footfall acknowledged the ground he had avoided for years. Truth had weight, Rourke had said. But it also had direction. Tonight would be his final session. Rourke hadn't said it outright, but Ethan felt it in the way the man had looked at him that morning, with a certainty that only appeared when a turning point had already been crossed. The gym door groaned as Ethan pushed it open. Rourke stood with his back to him, facing the far wall where the fading sunlight streaked through high windows in fractured beams. No equipment, no cones, no vest waited on the floor. The empty space felt intentional, ceremonial. "You're on time," Rourke said without turning. Ethan managed a faint smile. "Didn't want to be late again." Rourke faced him. His expression held something Ethan had not seen before. Pride, yes, but softened by something more elusive, closure. "No drills tonight," Rourke said. "No simulations." Ethan nodded, though part of him felt the faintest sting of loss. Training had become a ritual, one that reshaped him more than he'd realized. "Then what are we doing?" Rourke gestured for him to stand in the center of the room. Ethan obeyed. The hardwood felt warm beneath his boots, the air still with expectation. "We talk," Rourke said. "About your father. About you. And about what courage really demands." Ethan exhaled slowly, unsure whether he was ready but knowing he wouldn't be offered this moment again. "You said he saved your life," Ethan began. "How?" Rourke's gaze shifted toward a memory only he could see. "We were deployed in a region where lines blurred daily. One night, an ambush hit our convoy. Chaos. Smoke. Fire. I took shrapnel in the leg. I couldn't move." He paused, voice tightening. "Your father carried me nearly 2 miles through hostile terrain. Quiet. Steady. Determined." Ethan felt his breath catch. He imagined the father he had known, silent, reserved, haunted by things never spoken, moving through darkness with another man's life over his shoulder. "He never told me," Ethan whispered. "He wouldn't," Rourke said. "He didn't view it as heroism. He viewed it as responsibility." Ethan lowered his gaze. "I thought he never believed in me." Rourke stepped closer. "He believed in you more than you understood. He stayed silent because he feared his past might shape your future in ways you didn't choose." The words unknotted something tight in Ethan's chest. He had carried years of self-blame, misunderstanding, unanswered longing. Now those burdens loosened, unwound, and softened into something almost mournful. "I spent so long trying to become someone he'd respect," Ethan said. Rourke shook his head. "And all he ever wanted was for you to become yourself." Silence settled. Not heavy this time, gentle, like the settling of dust after a long storm. Rourke motioned for him to sit. They lowered themselves to the floor, cross-legged, facing each other. Ethan noticed how different this felt from every other day. Less command. More communion. "What happened the night you froze?" Rourke asked, not demanding, not testing, but inviting. Ethan inhaled slowly. "I saw the man fall. I saw blood. People yelling. I stepped forward, but my mind went blank. It felt like everything moved faster than I could understand." "That's shock," Rourke said softly. "Not failure. I told myself it meant I wasn't brave." Rourke's gaze deepened. Bravery doesn't erase fear or confusion. It coexists with them. Ethan let the words settle, feeling their truth ripple through him. Rourke continued. "Let me tell you how courage is measured. Not in the moment chaos erupts. Not in the reflexes you wish you had. Courage is measured in what you choose afterward. You're here, aren't you? Facing the truth. Training. Learning. That is bravery." Ethan blinked back the burn in his vision. Months of punishment disguised as discipline finally revealed themselves for what they were, a plea for redemption he had never needed to earn. Rourke rose to his feet and extended a hand. Ethan took it, letting himself be lifted. The gesture felt symbolic, passing from one chapter to another. "Stand at attention," Rourke said. Ethan obeyed instinctively, though he had never been a soldier. His spine straightened, shoulders squared, chin lifted. But this time there was no imitation in the posture. Only presence. Rourke walked a slow circle around him, evaluating, not his stance, but his transformation. "You wanted to become stronger," Rourke said. "Now you understand strength." Ethan exhaled quietly. "You wanted to become fearless. Now you understand fear." Ethan nodded. "And you wanted to know your father," Rourke said. "Now you understand him." Emotion broke through Ethan's composure. "Thank you," he whispered. Rourke paused beside him. "You don't owe me thanks. I didn't train you to become a soldier. I trained you to stop fighting ghosts." Ethan looked at him, eyes steady. "What do I do now?" Rourke stepped back, folding his hands behind his back. "You live." His voice softened. "You walk into the world not as someone built from punishment, but as someone shaped by truth." A wind rustled outside, brushing against the windows as if urging Ethan forward. Rourke continued, "And when fear comes again, and it will, you remember what you learned here, not to eliminate it, but to move with it." Ethan felt the words seal into him like a vow. Rourke's posture shifted, official, resolute. "This is our last session." Ethan expected the declaration. Yet it still punctured the air, final and irreversible. "Will I see you again?" Ethan asked. Rourke offered a faint, rare smile. "I'm not disappearing. But you don't need me anymore." The truth struck with quiet clarity. Training had been a bridge, not a destination. And bridges were meant to be crossed, not lived upon. Ethan looked around the gym, the shadows, the echoes, the memories embedded in its walls. This place had held his undoing and his rebuilding. But it no longer felt like a crucible. It felt like a threshold. He turned back to Rourke. "I won't forget this." "Good," Rourke said. "But don't cling to it either." The door behind Ethan creaked, stirred by a draft. A symbolic invitation. Rourke gave him one final nod, a commander's acknowledgement, a mentor's farewell, and something quieter, deeper, respect. Ethan stepped backward toward the exit, eyes still on the man who had reshaped the trajectory of his life. When he reached the doorway, he paused, letting a final moment stretch between them. Rourke spoke once more, voice low but strong. "Your father would be proud of the man you're becoming." Ethan swallowed hard, then stepped into the evening air. The world smelled different, like rain and possibility. He didn't feel fearless. He didn't feel invincible. He felt ready. And readiness, he finally understood, was its own form of courage.